My name is Jessica, and welcome to our show. We're very excited today. We've got a special guest, Gianna Gaudini. Gianna was formerly events executive at Google and now global head of events for SoftBank Vision Fund in California. She's also author of a very insightful book, Art of Event Planning, which I have read, and it's excellent, and just an all-round event extraordinaire. Welcome, Gianna.
Thanks, Jessica. So good to be here with you.
Thanks for joining us. So, Gianna, you've got a pretty cool career, Google, and you're an author now at SoftBank Vision Fund. Tell us a little bit about your current role and what you do there.
Sure. I'm currently the global head of events for the SoftBank Vision Fund. We're a venture capital firm that specializes in growth capital and late stage startup investments with the focus on tech, robotics, and AI. And I was hired a year ago to build an event team, an event strategy, and execute it for the company. So the types of events that I do support our portfolio companies, our founders, our investors, our prospect investors and founders, and then our internal employees.
So they sound like pretty sort of high-end events that you're doing.
Yes, exactly. I'm on the phone with CEOs all the time.
Brilliant. So you're based in California. You know lockdown started mid-March. We're now kind of nearly 3 months into social distancing stroke lockdown. What was going through your head when you realised events are going to be cancelled, and this is truly impacting our work and the way we live?
I actually felt really lucky in the beginning because my biggest event of the year is in Southern California in September. And when this all started happening in March, I thought, thank goodness I'm safe. This is all going to be over and done with by September. We're good. We're lucky. And slowly I started to realize that this is not going to be a couple months thing. This is going to be a couple years. And bringing together 500 executives from around the globe in September is not going to be feasible. And so, things change on a weekly basis, on a daily basis. And so being nimble and agile and pivoting our event strategy daily has become my remit.
Yeah, I think it's really sort of shown how agile humans can be, and how adaptable we can all be when we need to, when we're thrown into the situation.
And event planners do it best.
Yes, exactly. I'm with you there. So, if we look at there's a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel. It's seeping through at the moment. Things are beginning to get a little bit better. Things are opening up again. How do you think that post-pandemic, the types of events that we have are going to resonate with attendees and audiences? What type of experiences will they be looking for?
Well, I think it's a little bit of a catch-22 because I think after things start opening up, people are going to be craving the in-person dynamic of events. And so I think they're going to want them more than ever. However, I think for the next year or so, people are also going to be a little more hesitant to meet in large gatherings just because there's not yet a vaccine, there's the threat of a second wave of COVID. So I think small gatherings, virtual hybrid events are going to become the new normal for a while. And then I think it's really going to be a bit of a phased approach, similar to how the world is reopening. So there's obviously going to be a number of guidelines that planners are going to need to follow to make sure that they're prioritizing the safety and comfort of attendees. And it's going to be a new normal. It's going to be people wearing masks, and it's going to be staying 6 feet apart for the beginning, at least through 2020. And then, we'll see different types of events that might end up being more beneficial in the long run. So micro events where there might be a keynote with a small group in one place that's broadcast all over the world or to multiple venues. So I think this idea of a phased approach and hybrid approach, this gray area is going to be where we're living for a little while.
So with the kind of micro events and your predictions around having more more hybrid events, a lot more events that are broadcast, obviously there's a need for technology, more of a need for technology, and that the role of tech is going to be greater than ever. What are you seeing as the technology trends at the moment, and which of those trends do you think are going to be here to stay with us for a long time?
Yeah, well, when you think about it, going back to the office, the safest way to return to an office would be to go to individual offices with enclosed doors, right? The way that things were back in the 50s and 60s. We're lucky now that we have something that the 50s and 60s didn't have, which is ability to do what we're doing right now. We're on Zoom. We're taking meetings on Zoom. We're using FaceTime to connect with our loved ones. There's, I think, 500, I think that's the right number, 500 platforms for meetings now. Someone quoted me recently. So, we have more options for hosting virtual events and virtual meetings, which is really great. And with 5G coming online probably in the next year, things are going to run even smoother. So I think smart vendors have pivoted and they've shifted their focus to supporting virtual events for the time being. So, they're hosting brainstorm sessions for how to create the best virtual experience, whether that's creating kits to send to speakers so that there's a better in-home sound and lighting experience. I've seen production agencies that might not specialize in AV, but I've seen agencies that have production and fabrication capabilities pivot to supporting the business return to work by producing PPE and desk partitions and sanitation stations and signage. So I think smart vendors don't let the constraints of the situation limit them, but instead take the approach of, okay, what can we provide in this environment? So,
and it's like you said before, it's about finding agility in a crisis and really pivoting and being creative and being able to kind of think, right, okay, let's think what solutions we can find, what can we do in the current crisis.
Exactly.
So are there any particular examples of innovation? You mentioned a couple there, but are there any examples of innovation that you've seen within the live events industry where that you've thought, actually, that's pretty smart, that's really clever?
I have. I'll give you a few examples because, I do this in my book too. There's the high budget example of innovation, and then there's the very basic examples of innovation that might cost no budget. So I like to give both. So, the very low budget, no budget version is, I was impressed by West Elm. You can see my backdrop here. This lovely living room is not actually mine. Wow. Unfortunately, I have a toddler, so my house is not this pristine. But West Elm, capitalized on what everybody was doing, which was hopping on these Zoom calls. And they quickly created a number of these, dream home virtual backdrops that you'd go on their site and peruse and download. So that's very simple, no budget way of finding a need and marketing accordingly. I recently attended the virtual TED conference. I was supposed to be live in Vancouver, which is one of my favorite events. And the team did a number of things creatively. They even had a virtual photo booth experience.
Oh,
it was very clever. And I thought it was very smart, because why do companies like photo booths? They like them because people then post on social, right? And spread the word. So it's a great brand builder. They did it virtually. I couldn't resist doing it. Easy. It probably didn't cost a lot of money. Everyone could do it remotely. So those are a couple lo-fi, creative things that I've seen done that I thought were very clever. And then I've talked to agencies that are doing some really cool, complex things, like, they're bringing together people using virtual reality to have dinner in these really rarefied experiences, like a castle in Ireland, and they're transporting people there via virtual reality for dinner and sending them the food that they would be eating if they were there. And so that's a little bit more complex, but for, more of a high profile crowd with high expectations for doing something new. That I thought that was an interesting way to make that work.
Do you think that those type of experiences are sustainable, or do you think they're here just to kind of put a plaster on the current situation and the fact that we can't go out?
Oh yeah, I mean, Apple just recently announced its acquisition of the company Next VR, and it's likely going to be where large sporting events are going to be streamed for the foreseeable future. So, for this period of time where we're in limbo, I think we're going to start needing to pivot to platforms where we can have these virtual experiences.
And just sort of going back to you and your events, how has it impacted the partnerships that you have with AV providers? Obviously we're talking to AVIXA members here. It's the pro AV community. Are you still in contact with some of the partners and the production companies and the AV partners that you normally work with, or has that quietened down a little bit?
I am. The first thing that I did was meet with literally every agency that I've spoken with or worked with. I wanted to give them all an opportunity to brainstorm with me, to share their revised capabilities. And so it's very important to me to maintain my relationships with my agencies and my network and my providers. And so it was really interesting to hear what they were doing, not only in my sector, but for other companies. Like one of my partners was helping to produce this virtual graduation for all the grads that couldn't do that in person. I thought it was very creative what they were doing. And so what I've done is, if I can't necessarily use an agency for my purposes, I've got a pretty big network. And so I make a lot of referrals, and I've been able to support the industry and my partners that way.
Okay. And do you see, what's your views on what's going to happen to that AV community as we do go into more smaller events and more kind of live broadcasts, and an increase in the number of virtual experiences as well? Is there any predictions that you can give in terms of the AV community?
Well, the AV community is lucky because, there's always going to be a need for content. Content is king more than ever right now. And when you think about it, what holds people's attentions most isn't the flashy, virtual platform trade show, or, these virtual experiences hold people's attentions for a few minutes. What really holds people's attention is well-produced content, good speakers with good sound and good audio. And so smart AV providers will come up with, a menu of options that they can offer clients, similar to how I shared some high-end, low-end examples of innovation. Mm-hmm. Smart AV providers will come up with, look, we know a lot of you are going to be doing this scrappily for the time being on your own, but this is how we can help you. Here's best practices. Here's kits we can send you that can up-level your experience for a minimum budget. And if you want to upgrade it, we can do this, and as you start to phase into live events, we could do this. So I think coming up with a range of options for clients is what the smart AV provider would do right now.
So would you say that you're looking at AV providers as kind of moving or transitioning towards being more co-creators, so working with you as an event planner increasingly to try and achieve the objectives of the event?
Yes, I love that term, co-creator. And I would encourage, any agency, a production agency, AV provider, to make sure that you're always asking that question about what your client's goals are, instead of just coming to the table with, this is what we can do, this is what we can't do. Take that first step to understand what it is that your client's trying to achieve. And then you might be able to come to the table with some ideas that they didn't consider. They might not know what they need to execute properly.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant. I just want to turn our attention now to your book. So I mentioned it in my intro. It's a super book, The Art of Event Planning. Please read it, everyone, if you haven't done so already. It's very insightful, full of lots of tips and advice. Can you share a few insights from your book, particularly ones that might be quite helpful during these challenging times for event planners?
Sure. The first tip that I always say is the one I just mentioned, which is no matter what type of event you're planning, be it social, corporate, live, virtual, you should never start planning the details until you've established your goals and the purpose of your event. And then use those to drive every decision that you're making. So I see that these days with, wonderful platforms like Pinterest, people get so hung up on what color they want their florals or what food they want to serve. They get right into the logistics or the finer details without really taking that time to establish what the goals of the event are and how you're going to measure whether it's successful in the end. And then that becomes your tool to assess everything else moving forward. And that's more important these days more than ever with budgets being so tight. We really need to prove the value of these events and why we're doing them. And then, once you have those goals, I like to build out an event brief. And that's really helpful, especially when you're working with partners, because you can answer questions before you get started, like, what do I want my attendees to do, think, and feel before, during, and after the event? And as you start answering those questions, you can figure out what the best tactics are for achieving them to drive your event planning. And then once you have those core pillars, then you can move into designing the details and incorporating those things that really take your event to the next level, like elements of surprise and delight. And they don't, surprise and delight doesn't have to be high budget. I always like to preface things with that. Is I give examples in the book of how I did it with a high budget at Google, producing events for 30,000 people, but also how you can incorporate surprise and delight to dinner parties that you do at your own house. It doesn't have to require a lot of budget to be thoughtful.
And I suppose if having that event plan and that brief in place right at the beginning then helps you to really kind of articulate your vision to the partners you work with and your team. So it's a good starting point for everyone to get signed up to the same vision.
Exactly. And I always tell people that I mentor in this industry, attendees will probably remember 3 things max. So think of those 3 things you want them to take away from your event, and then don't sweat the rest so much.
Yeah.
Make sure everything runs smoothly, but if you can't get every single bell and whistle, that's okay. Attendees are probably only going to remember 3 things. Like, think of the last wedding you went to. How many things do you remember about that wedding? Probably not as much as the bride and groom.
Super advice. I mean, it's, a case of just less is more sometimes. And people remember a few nuggets, golden nuggets that you want them to walk away with.
Right. So do those things well. That's the important thing, is pick a few things and do those few things well, rather than trying to do a lot of things not so well.
Exactly. So recently you've done a fantastic thing. You've been releasing chapters of your book on LinkedIn for people to read for free. Give us some background to that. What made you decide that you would do this? And what feedback have you had from people that have been reading your chapters?
Yeah, I decided to do that. I was teaching a class as a guest speaker for the California State University schools. And, as I was sharing, my experience in the industry and answering all their questions, it made me realize how important it is right now to keep event planners inspired, because this industry is going to come back bigger than ever. It always does. We've had setbacks before, and live events are, they're here to stay. And so I thought by releasing chapters in my book, I was hoping to make the content more accessible to people who might not be able to afford it right now, but more importantly, hopefully it'll keep people inspired and reminded of the great events that we're going to do in the future.
Brilliant. What a positive message that is, and a great thing that you're doing. I'm sure there's a lot of appreciative people out there. So we're coming to the end of the interview now. I just wanted to ask you for some closing comments. Are there any kind of tips or words of inspiration that you've got for the industry, for the live events industry? I mean, you've been pretty inspiring anyway so far, and mentioned that we're going to come back with a bang. The live events industry isn't going to be dead for long. But is there anything else that you would add to that in terms of, for event planners out there, for AV companies who are working in the live events industry, what's your message to them?
Well, first of all, there's this concept of impermanence. Nothing is the same forever. So we are going to come out of this. There is an end, even though there's a lot of uncertainty right now. Just remember that there will be an end to the current situation. And while we're in the current situation, why not make the most of it? And I always like to say, add as many tools to your event planning toolkit as you can. I continue to do this. I'm a lifelong learner. I think a lot of folks in our industry are too. That's why we love this industry. So take this opportunity to learn new things. They might not go perfectly the first time, but as you do more and more, you're going to add that to your toolkit, and it's going to make you stronger in the end.
Brilliant. Gianna, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been great speaking to you.
And you. Thank you so much.